1,000 soldiers surrounded him. They had swords. They had shields. They had armor. He had nothing. No weapon, no army, no escape. Then his eyes fell on something lying in the dust. A donkey's jawbone. Moments later, 1,000 warriors would be dead. How could a single man defeat an army with the bone of a dead animal? And why would God choose such a strange weapon to deliver Israel? Tonight, we uncover the unbelievable battle of Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, and the mysterious moment recorded in the book of Judges when God used the most unlikely weapon in history. A story of power, rage, and divine strength that turned a battlefield into legend. In the dark and violent days recorded in the book of Judges, Israel lived under constant oppression. The people cried out for deliverance, but their enemies seemed unstoppable. Among those enemies were the powerful Philistines, a ruthless nation known for their weapons, their armies, and their iron rule over the land. Village after village fell under their control. Fear spread across Israel like a shadow. The people felt abandoned, powerless, and trapped. But God had already prepared someone to confront this empire. A man born under mysterious circumstances. A man whose life had been foretold before he even took his first breath. His name was Samson. From birth, Samson had been set apart as a Nazirite, dedicated to God for a divine mission. His strength would not come from training, weapons, or armies. His power would come from God himself. And when the Spirit of the Lord moved upon him, Samson became unstoppable. Lions could not defeat him. Ropes could not bind him. Armies could not intimidate him. Yet the moment we are about to explore is perhaps the most astonishing of them all. One day, Samson would stand alone against 1,000 warriors. He had no sword, no shield, no army behind him, only something lying in the dust, the jawbone of a donkey. And what happened next would become one of the most unbelievable victories in biblical history, a moment that would prove it that God does not always choose powerful weapons. Sometimes he chooses the most unlikely things to defeat the strongest enemies. Tonight, we uncover the shocking story of how God used a simple jawbone to bring down an army, and why this strange weapon carries a powerful message that still echoes thousands of years later. Part 1. The birth of a Nazirite warrior. Long before the battle, before the jawbone, before the 1,000 fallen soldiers, a promise was made. A promise that would shape the life of a child who had not yet been born. In those days, Israel once again turned away from God. As a result, the nation fell under the cruel domination of the Philistines for 40 long years. The Philistines ruled with fear. Their soldiers marched through Israelite villages. Their weapons were stronger. Their armies were larger, and the people of Israel felt powerless to resist them. But even in Israel's darkest moments, God was already preparing a deliverer, a child of prophecy. In a small town called Zorah lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were faithful people, but their home carried a deep sorrow. Manoah's wife could not have children. In ancient Israel, this was a heavy burden. A woman without a child often lived with shame and heartbreak. But one day, something extraordinary happened. An angel of the Lord appeared to her. The messenger spoke words that must have sounded impossible. "You are barren and have no children, but you will conceive and give birth to a son. This child would not be ordinary. His life would belong to God before he ever entered the world. He would be a Nazirite, the Nazirite vow. A Nazirite was someone set apart completely for God. The vow carried strict commands. He must never drink wine or any strong drink. He must never touch anything unclean. And most importantly, a razor must never touch his hair. The long, uncut hair would be a visible symbol of his covenant with God. This child would be different from the moment he was born. The angel declared something even more astonishing. The boy would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. The birth of Samson. Soon the prophecy came true. Manoah's wife gave birth to a son. They named him Samson. The child grew, and the Bible records something powerful. The Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him. From a young age, Samson was unlike anyone else. Strength seemed to flow through him. But this strength was not simply physical power. It was divine. A strength that came when the Spirit of God moved upon him. A destiny yet to unfold. As Samson grew into manhood, the tension between Israel and the Philistines only worsened. War loomed over the land. The enemy armies grew stronger. And somewhere in Israel, a young Nazarite warrior walked the hills, unaware of the legendary battles that awaited him. But the day would soon come when Samson would stand alone before an army. And on that day, his only weapon would be something no warrior would ever choose: a simple jawbone of a donkey. And with it, history would be written in blood and legend. Part 2. Samson's rage against the Philistines. The man destined to challenge the Philistines was growing stronger with every passing year. His name was Samson. But Samson was not like the prophets before him. He was not quiet, not gentle, and certainly not predictable. Where other leaders spoke words of wisdom, Samson acted with explosive force. The Spirit of God gave him extraordinary strength, but Samson's temper often drove him into dangerous situations. And soon that temper would ignite a war. The lion in the vineyard. One day Samson traveled toward the Philistine city of Timnah. It was there he saw a Philistine woman he wanted to marry. To many Israelites, this was shocking. The Philistines were their oppressors, but Samson insisted. As he walked through the vineyards on his journey, something suddenly burst from the shadows. A young lion. The animal roared and lunged toward him. But in that moment, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon Samson. With his bare hands, he tore the lion apart. No sword, no spear, only raw, supernatural strength. It was the first glimpse of the power that would one day terrify entire armies. The wedding betrayal. Later, Samson returned to Timnah for his wedding feast. Philistine guests surrounded him, watching carefully. They knew this Israelite carried unusual strength, and they did not trust him. During the celebration, Samson posed a riddle to the guests. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. The riddle referred to the lion Samson had killed and the honey he later found inside its carcass. But the Philistines could not solve it. So they turned to deception. They threatened Samson's bride. Terrified, she pressured Samson until he revealed the answer. When the Philistines finally announced the solution, Samson immediately knew he had been betrayed. His anger ignited like fire. Samson's first strike. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him again. Samson traveled to Ashkelon, one of the major cities of the Philistines. There, he struck down 30 men. He took their garments and returned to Timnah to pay the wager he had lost in the riddle. But the betrayal cut deep. His marriage collapsed. The Philistines had humiliated him, and Samson would not forget. Fire across the fields. Sometime later, Samson returned to see his wife. But her father delivered devastating news. She had been given to another man. Something inside Samson snapped. This time, his revenge would be unlike anything the Philistines had ever seen. Samson captured 300 foxes. He tied them together in pairs and fastened burning torches between their tails. Then he released them into the Philistine grain fields. Flames raced across the countryside. The harvest burned. The vineyards burned. The olive groves burned. An entire season of food was destroyed in a single night. The Philistines were furious. A cycle of violence. When the Philistines discovered Samson was responsible, they responded with brutal vengeance. They killed the woman Samson once loved and her father. The conflict had spiraled beyond control, and Samson struck back again. The Bible says he attacked them with a great slaughter. Bodies fell. The war between Samson and the Philistines had officially begun, but the greatest confrontation had not yet arrived. Soon, thousands of Philistine soldiers would march into Israel searching for one man, and when they finally surrounded him, Samson would have no weapon, only the jawbone of a donkey lying in the dust. And what happened next would become one of the most unbelievable battles in the entire Bible. Part 3. The army that came for one man. The fires that Samson unleashed across the fields of the Philistines had done more than destroy crops. They had humiliated an empire. The Philistines were no longer dealing with a rebellious Israelite. They were hunting a man who had become a symbol of defiance, and they would not stop until he was captured or dead. The invasion. Soon the Philistine army marched into the land of Judah. Thousands of soldiers poured across the border. Their mission was simple: find Samson. The Israelites watched in fear as the enemy army gathered near the place called Lehi. The people of Judah knew exactly why the Philistines had come. One man had provoked them. One man had burned their fields. One man had killed their warriors. And now the entire nation was about to suffer for it. So the leaders of Judah made a desperate decision. They would surrender Samson. The betrayal. 3,000 men from Judah climbed into the rocky hills where Samson was hiding. When they found him, their faces were filled with anxiety. They spoke carefully. "Do you not realize that the Philistines rule over us?" Their voices carried both fear and frustration. "What have you done to us?" Samson looked at them calmly. "I only did to them what they did to me." But the men had not come to argue. They had come with ropes. "We have come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." For a moment, the air hung heavy with tension. 3,000 Israelites standing against one man. But Samson did not resist. He made them promise only one thing. "Swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves." They agreed. They tied him with 2 new ropes and led him down the hill, straight toward the waiting Philistine army. The trap. As Samson approached Lehi, the Philistines began shouting in triumph. Their enemy had been delivered without a fight, bound, helpless, defeated. But in that moment, something changed. The Bible describes it with chilling power. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. The ropes binding Samson suddenly became like burnt threads. They snapped apart as if they had been touched by fire. The man the Philistines thought they had captured was now standing free in the middle of their army. Thousands of warriors surrounded him. But Samson had no sword, no spear, no shield, only something lying nearby in the dust, the weapon no warrior would choose. Samson looked down. There on the ground was the jawbone of a donkey, dry, cracked, worthless, at least to any ordinary man. But in the hands of Samson, it would become a weapon of legend. He picked it up, and then the battle began. The next moments would shock the ancient world, because before the sun set over the battlefield of Lehi, 1,000 Philistine soldiers would lie dead. And the weapon that defeated them all was a single bone. Part 4. The Jawbone Massacre. The battlefield at Lehi fell silent for a moment. Thousands of Philistines stood around a man they believed was their prisoner. Moments earlier, he had been bound with ropes. Now the ropes lay broken at his feet. And standing in the center of their army was Samson, free. The Philistines realized too late that the trap had failed, because the man they thought they had captured had just become the most dangerous warrior on the battlefield, the spirit of power. The ancient text describes the moment with chilling clarity. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. This was the secret behind Samson's strength. It was never about muscle. It was never about size. When God's Spirit moved, Samson became unstoppable. The ropes that had bound him moments earlier snapped like burnt thread, and now his enemies stood frozen in confusion. But Samson had no weapon, no sword, no spear, nothing a warrior would normally carry into battle. Then his eyes fell to the ground, the weapon in the dust. Lying there was the jawbone of a donkey, bleached by the sun, dry and brittle, a piece of bone that no soldier would ever choose as a weapon. Yet Samson bent down and picked it up. In that moment, the battlefield changed. Because what looked useless in human hands became powerful in the hands of someone empowered by God. The Philistines charged, and the slaughter began. One man against an army. The first soldier rushed forward. The jawbone swung through the air with brutal force. The man collapsed instantly. Another soldier followed, then another. Soon the entire army surged towards Samson. But the man standing in their midst moved with terrifying speed. Each strike of the jawbone sent another warrior crashing to the ground. Armor shattered. Helmets cracked. Bodies fell. Dust rose into the air as soldiers screamed and fled. But Samson did not stop. The battle raged across the valley. And as the hours passed, the ground of Lehi became covered with fallen warriors. The Bible records the staggering result. 1,000 men had fallen, killed by a single warrior, with a single bone. The song of victory. When the fighting finally stopped, Samson stood alone among the bodies. The jawbone still gripped in his hand. The battlefield was silent, except for the wind moving across the valley. And Samson spoke words that would echo through history. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have made donkeys of them. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. Then he threw the jawbone aside, and the place became known as Ramoth Lehi, meaning Jawbone Hill. The strength was never his. But as the adrenaline faded, Samson suddenly realized something terrifying. The battle had drained him. His throat burned. His body trembled with exhaustion, and there was no water anywhere in sight. The man who had just defeated an army now faced the possibility of dying from thirst. In that moment, Samson cried out to God, and once again, God would answer. Part 5. The Miracle of Water in the Desert. The battlefield of Lehi was silent. The dust had settled. The shouts of the Philistines were gone. All around lay the bodies of 1,000 fallen warriors, and in the center of it all stood one exhausted man, Samson. The jawbone that had just defeated an army lay discarded on the ground. Moments earlier, Samson had stood like a force of nature, unstoppable, invincible. But now the strength that carried him through battle was fading. The warrior's weakness. Samson's throat burned with thirst. His breathing became heavy. His body trembled from exhaustion. The same man who had crushed soldiers moments earlier now faced a quiet but deadly enemy: dehydration. Under the scorching heat, Samson realized something terrifying. He might die, not by the sword of an enemy, but by thirst. And in that moment of weakness, Samson did something he rarely did. He prayed. Samson's cry to God. Samson lifted his voice to heaven. His words carried both gratitude and desperation. You have given your servant this great victory. He recognized that the power he had displayed did not belong to him. It belonged to God. Then he cried out again, Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? For the first time in this story, the mighty warrior stood completely helpless. The man who defeated 1,000 enemies could not save himself from thirst. And in that moment, God answered. Water from the earth. The Bible records a miracle that many people overlook. God split open a hollow place at Lehi, and suddenly, water began to flow. Clear water bubbling from the earth. Samson dropped to his knees and drank deeply. Life returned to his body. Strength filled his limbs again. The man who stood at the edge of death was restored, because the same God who gave him victory in battle also sustained him afterward. The deeper meaning. This moment revealed something powerful about the story. The jawbone was never the true weapon. Samson was never the true source of strength. The real power behind the victory was God. God had chosen the most unlikely weapon imaginable, a donkey's jawbone, to prove a powerful truth. Victory does not depend on human strength. It depends on divine power. A lesson echoing through time. The story recorded in the book of Judges leaves us with a striking lesson. God often works through the unexpected. A shepherd defeats a giant with a sling. A prophet parts the sea with a staff. And a warrior defeats an army with a bone. Again and again, God chooses the weak things of the world to defeat the strong. Because when the impossible happens, everyone knows where the power truly came from. The legacy of Samson. After the battle at Lehi, Samson continued to lead Israel for many years. His life would still be filled with triumphs and tragic mistakes. But the day he stood alone against an army with nothing but a jawbone became one of the most unforgettable victories in biblical history. A moment when heaven proved that the power of God can turn even the simplest object into a weapon capable of changing history. And it all began with something lying quietly in the dust, a forgotten bone, waiting for the moment God would use it.